Dawn broke slowly over the river, brushing gold against the edges of the world. I stood by the porch, coffee in hand, watching the mist lift off the fields like smoke escaping a dream. Today was meant to be simple, just a hunting trip with my oldest friend, Ayan. Yet the air carried something heavier than dew, something unspoken. The stillness reminded me of the space between me and Omar, my partner of 6 years. Our home was quiet now, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace. We'd grown used to it, exchanging gentle nods instead of conversation, polite smiles instead of laughter. Omar still cared, I knew that, but lately, his kindness had felt like distance dressed as affection. When he'd kissed my cheek that morning and whispered, "Stay safe," I had nodded without looking back. My chest tightened as I thought about how easily I'd left. I told myself I needed the fresh air, the open sky, the sound of the river, anything to break the monotony of routine. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled me back. Ayan's Jeep came into view, dust rising behind it like an old film reel. He leaned out the window, waving with that same careless grin I'd known since university. He hadn't changed much, still sun-browned, still effortlessly confident, the kind of man who could turn silence into comfort, ready to disappear for a while. He called out that I managed a smile. More than ready. The drive out of town was long and quiet. Early light filtered through the trees, glinting off the river that ran alongside the road. Ayan hummed softly to an old tune playing on the radio, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Every now and then, he'd glance my way and smirk, as if trying to pull me out of my thoughts. "You've been quieter than usual," he said after a while. "Everything good at home?" The question landed heavier than he intended. I looked out the window, watching the blur of fields and sky. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired, that's all." He nodded, accepting the answer but not believing it. He never pressed. That was one of the things about Ayan. He always knew when to let silence do the talking. That we reached the riverbank just past noon. The boat waited, tethered to a crooked post, rocking gently with the current. I felt the breeze shift as we stepped closer, carrying the scent of wet wood and grass. It was familiar, grounding, yet somehow alive with tension. Ayan lifted the gear out of the Jeep, his sleeves rolled up, arms tanned and strong from years of outdoor work. Watching him move, I felt something twist inside me, an ache I had tried to ignore for too long. There had always been something about Ayan that pulled me toward him, quietly, irresistibly. It wasn't just attraction. It was ease. It was belonging. That we loaded the rifles, packed the cooler, and pushed off. The water was calm, reflecting the pale sky like glass. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the oars dipping rhythmically and the distant cry of birds echoing through the trees. Sitting across from him, I caught his reflection shimmering on the water, his expression thoughtful. He noticed me looking and smiled, soft and unguarded. It was the kind of smile that said more than words could handle. "Feels good to get away," he murmured. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "It does." He leaned back, resting one arm on the side of the boat. "You ever think about how simple life used to be? Back in college, no responsibilities, no expectations. Just us and the river." I chuckled, though the sound came out thin. "Yeah. Back when we thought we had all the time in the world." The conversation drifted away, replaced again by silence. But it wasn't empty. It pulsed with everything unsaid, the memories, the small glances, the things we never dared to name. That I took a deep breath and focused on the water. Each ripple felt like a heartbeat, steady yet uncertain. I wondered what Omar was doing at that moment. Probably making lunch, maybe scrolling through his phone. I wondered if he missed me, or if he simply trusted that I'd always come back. The afternoon sun warmed the boat as it drifted farther from shore. I could feel Ayan's gaze linger briefly before turning away. That quiet pull between us, the one I'd spent years denying, began to hum again beneath my ribs. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When the boat reached the middle of the river, Ayan rested the oars and looked around. "It's perfect here," he said softly. "Feels like the world just stops." I nodded, though my chest was heavy. Maybe that's what I want, I thought. For everything to stop, just for a while, the wind brushed across the water, and the sunlight flickered on Ayan's face. In that suspended moment, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet admission I couldn't take back that I told myself I came to hunt. But as the river swayed beneath us and his eyes met mine, I realized I was already being hunted, by my own heart. The sun climbed higher, scattering diamonds across the river's slow-moving surface. Ayan rode with an easy rhythm, the muscles in his forearms tightening and releasing with each pull. I watched the water break against the oars, pretending to study the ripples when, in truth, I was studying him. The air was cool, but there was warmth between us, unspoken, steady, and quietly dangerous. Let's anchor here, Ayan said, easing the boat toward a shaded bend where reeds whispered in the breeze. We drifted to a stop. The forest surrounded us, silent except for the low rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of a bird. He reached into the cooler, tossed me a bottle of water, and smiled. To another wasted hunt, he joked that I caught it, smiling back. We haven't even started. Yeah, but you know how this goes, he said. We talk too much, forget to aim, and go home empty-handed. His laugh was light, careless, but it lingered longer than it should have. The sound pressed against the quiet space between us, blurring the line between friendship and something else entirely. For a while, we tried to focus. Ayan scanned the shoreline with his rifle, his eyes narrowing against the glare. I followed his lead, but my heart wasn't in it. The hunt felt irrelevant, the air was too charged for precision. My hands were steady, yet my thoughts scattered, drawn to the curve of his jaw, the quiet confidence in his voice, the small glint of sweat at his temple. I told myself it was harmless. Just admiration. Just memory, but memory is rarely innocent. The scent of the river carried me backward, to a night years ago. It had rained hard, and we'd taken shelter under the same cracked umbrella after a party. Ayan had laughed, his shoulder brushing mine, water dripping from his hair. For a brief second, he'd looked at me in that same quiet, searching way he was looking now. I had turned away then, terrified of what I saw reflected back. The echo of that night filled the present moment, as if time had looped to give me another chance to answer a question I'd long avoided. Hey, Ayan said softly, pulling me back. You're miles away. You okay? I hesitated, the lie forming instinctively. Yeah. Just thinking. He tilted his head. About Omar? His name struck the air like a stone thrown into calm water. I looked down, watching the ripples spread in the river's reflection. Something like that, I said finally. Ayan set the rifle down, resting his arms on his knees. His tone was gentle. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I don't even know what to say, I admitted. It's like, we're both there, but not really there. Everything feels polite, careful, empty. He nodded slowly. Sometimes people drift apart without meaning to. I studied his profile, the way light caught the small scar on his cheek from a childhood accident, the calmness in his expression that always made me feel safe. And you? I asked quietly. Anyone in your life these days? He smiled faintly. A few almosts. Nothing that stayed. Something tightened in my chest. Almosts. The word hung between us like a thread waiting to be pulled. The afternoon heat deepened. Cicadas hummed from the trees. Ayan leaned back, closing his eyes, his hand trailing idly in the water. You ever think about how easy it used to be? He asked. Before everything got complicated. Every day, I said. That he opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked. The moment stretched, delicate as glass. The wind slowed. The world held its breath. Ayan smiled, but his voice was quiet when he spoke. You know, sometimes it feels like we never stopped being those same two idiots by the river. We just got older, that's all. I wanted to agree. I wanted to stay in that suspended truth forever. But inside me, something ached, because what he said wasn't true. We weren't those boys anymore. We'd learned to hide the parts of ourselves that didn't fit the world's idea of who we should be. The sun began to dip lower, staining the water orange. Neither of us had fired a single shot. The rifles lay forgotten at our feet. As we packed up, Ayan gave me a look that was half smile, half silence. Guess we're terrible hunters. I met his gaze, my voice softer than I intended. Maybe we weren't really here to hunt. He didn't answer, but I saw the truth flicker in his eyes, recognition, guilt, longing, all at once. That we rode back without speaking. The river glowed with the last light of day, and I could feel the distance between us shrinking even as the shoreline approached. Every pull of the oars was an act of restraint, every glance a quiet confession neither of us dared to voice. When we reached the dock, Ayan jumped out first and held out his hand to steady me. I took it. His grip was warm, firm, lingering just long enough for the world to tilt. As I stepped onto solid ground, a strange realization settled in my chest. We hadn't crossed a visible line, but something inside me already had. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, just the river, just the past returning for air. But when he smiled again, I knew better. Some hunts end without a single shot. Yet somehow, you still lose something you can never get back. The night arrived quietly, cloaked in the soft rhythm of crickets and the slow hush of the river. A small fire crackled between us, its glow flickering across Ayan's face as he tossed another piece of driftwood into the flames. The warmth painted the world in gold and shadow, 2 men, a single flame, and too many things left unsaid. That we'd set up camp along the bank, far from the road and the world that waited beyond the trees. The hunt was long forgotten. Neither of us spoke of the rifles lying beside the tent, or of the silence that had followed us back from the water. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, thick with meaning neither of us dared to break. Ayan leaned back on his elbows, gazing at the sky. It's been a while since I've seen stars like this, he said softly. You forget how bright they are until you're away from everything. I nodded, staring into the fire. Maybe everything's just too loud where we live. We stop noticing what's beautiful. He turned his head toward me. Or maybe we stop noticing what's missing. The words landed between us like sparks from the fire. I didn't answer right away. My throat felt dry, my pulse loud in my ears. There was nothing flirtatious in his tone, just honesty, quiet and raw. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The fire popped, scattering embers that rose like fleeting stars. Then, in a voice barely louder than the night breeze, I said, "Do you ever wish things were different?" Ayan looked at me, eyes reflecting the flames. Different how? I don't know, I murmured. Simpler. Easier to understand. Maybe, less lonely. He didn't look away. Yeah, he said after a moment. All the time. Something in me tightened. The river murmured beside us, a sound like breathing. The distance between us felt small, fragile, a thread that could snap with a single word. That I could have told him then, about the way I'd been drifting through life with Omar, how love had become a routine instead of a feeling, how I sometimes caught myself searching for something I couldn't even name. But I didn't. Some truths are too heavy to speak out loud. Ayan sighed and leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You know, he said, I've thought a lot about how people stay loyal. To each other, to themselves. And I think, sometimes it's not about lying or cheating. It's about pretending you don't feel what you feel. His words cut through me with quiet precision. I'm not sure we can control that, I said. What we feel. No, he agreed. But we can control what we do with it. The fire cracked again. A log collapsed inward, sending a wave of sparks into the air. For a second, our faces were illuminated fully, open, exposed. His expression was calm, but his eyes gave him away. They held the same confusion, the same pull, the same fragile restraint. I felt that I wanted to reach out. To close the distance. To silence the ache that had been growing between us since morning. But something, loyalty, fear, or maybe decency, held me still. Instead, I said quietly, sometimes I think we meet the right people at the wrong time. Ayan smiled faintly, his gaze falling back to the fire. Maybe time doesn't care about what's right. We sat there for a while, letting the flames shrink to glowing embers. The world felt paused, like the river itself was holding its breath. I lay back on the cold ground, staring up at the stars. Each one seemed impossibly distant, unreachable, yet still burning. That I and the quiet, I thought of Omar, his patience, his steady affection, the life we built without ever really checking if it was still alive. Guilt settled over me like dew, soft but undeniable. I hadn't betrayed him with touch, but something far more elusive, attention, emotion, a quiet hunger I'd kept hidden for years. Ayan lay down beside me, a careful arm's length away. "You'll be heading back tomorrow?" he asked. "Yeah," I whispered. "You?" "Same." The word same felt heavier than it should have. We both knew this moment would fade by morning, tucked away into the folds of memory where neither of us would dare unfold it again. That I closed my eyes, listening to the soft hum of the night, the river's sigh, the fire's last crackle, the sound of Ayan's steady breathing beside me. It was peaceful, and painful all at once. When dawn finally crept over the horizon, we packed in silence. He handed me a thermos of coffee, his fingers brushing mine briefly, unintentionally, or maybe not. As we loaded the last of the gear into the jeep, he gave a small, almost wistful smile. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "You too," I said. Neither of us mentioned the river, or the fire, or the invisible line we'd crossed and then pretended not to. We just stood there for a moment, facing the still water that had seen everything and promised to tell no one. On the drive home, I watched the morning light spill through the trees. My phone buzzed, Omar's name on the screen. I didn't answer. Not yet did I. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face, calm, composed, but different somehow. Something in me had shifted, quietly, permanently, and as the river disappeared behind the bend, I finally understood. Infidelity doesn't always begin with a touch. Sometimes, it begins with a silence you stop trying to fill.